All right. Good afternoon, Scott Luton and Greg White with Supply Chain Now. And of course, Sarah Barnes-Humphrey with Let's Talk Supply Chain. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the live stream.
Hey there.
Hello. I am excited to be here with my two favorite supply chainers. If anybody saw my post on LinkedIn, I had to give a shout out to my two favorite supply chainers, and I love you guys, man.
Yeah,
wow.
Thank you.
Feel
Likewise.
Feel the digital love. Okay, well, we've had this is our third conversation, I bet, in the last 10 days.
Yes.
And lots of passion. I think we recorded officially 32 and a half hours of content. We're going to cut that down to 3-hour episodes, right, Greg?
Well, and we can only publish what was actually on topic for supply chain among all the other topics that we discussed. So yeah, right. Well, I think we can cut that down to 37 seconds or so.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I think you guys are going to win the award for the longest episode on Let's Talk Supply Chain podcast.
Hey.
Is that right?
Is that Guinness certified?
Just add it to the trophy case.
All right. So we got another great conversation teed up today. It's kind of a mix of kind of a review of what's been published, a heads up of what's coming, with a little bit of good news and some extra resources and information all sprinkled in. So we're looking forward to this. Hey, quick programming note. If you like this live stream, you ought to check out Let's Talk Supply Chain and Supply Chain Now, wherever you get your podcast from. And that's it. No 17-minute programming bookend on the front end, Greg. Can you imagine that?
That's nice. I like that. Very compact.
All right. Well,
There's already a good influence on us.
That's right. That's right. All right. So you know what, folks? One of my favorite aspects of the last few months here in at least the States or North America, when things have changed, even though they have been changing globally for several months before that, is finding the good news that's in industry, especially the good news in supply chain. And there's been no, believe it or not, there's really been no shortage. There's a lot of companies and leaders that are jumping in and figuring out where they can help in the battle against COVID-19. So with that as a backdrop, Sarah, I'd love for you to start with one of your favorite good news stories here in recent weeks.
I would love to. And I just want to say, I think there's a bunch of us that are all on the same page, because I saw that Jammin, I think it was yesterday, posted this exact question, and our question of the week that's coming up on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram tomorrow morning is all about this topic. And so it's very timely. I think people want to just talk about it and jump in with good news. So I'm glad that we're doing it today. So one of them I'm gonna call out is Grocery Hero. Actually, when you brought this up a little bit earlier, I kind of forgot about it, but it's a company here in Canada that is pairing volunteers to go into grocery stores to buy groceries for frontline workers, because frontline workers don't want to go into grocery stores because they're afraid that they're going to contaminate or potentially spread the virus even further. And so Grocery Hero put those two together. I think they had like 4,000 volunteers in a week. I haven't spoken to them for a couple of weeks, but I thought that was a really good feel-good story. And I think they paired their 500th just 2 weeks ago. So
wow, outstanding.
That's a great idea.
Absolutely. Hey, quick shout out to John Buglino, which I know all three of us have enjoyed his participation in live streams and podcasts. Memory is back. Memory, I tell you, she has been a fountain of thought leadership in recent weeks.
Yeah,
fantastic. Clay Phillips, the dog, is in the house via our LinkedIn live stream. And I know we're talking good news, and Greg, I'm pivoting over to you, but I gotta share this quick little blurb that came in from Rayal via Facebook. And that was a topic of a lot of what you really spoke to very directly yesterday on the Buzz. So we don't have to factor that in now. We can bake that in later, but I want to plant that seed with you. And Rayal, thanks for joining us via Facebook.
Yeah, I think at some point we're going to have to face the brutal facts. If you've ever gone through a good to great analysis, we'll talk about all of that later. I got to tell you, I actually went out to get lunch here. We're in Georgia, in the United States, and our shelter-in-place restrictions have been lifted, and I saw cars parked in front of businesses, my favorite guitar store was not yet open, but you can now dine in restaurants with appropriate social distancing. And I saw some really, really good measures. So all of the employees are wearing masks, and they're kind of indoors and outdoors and paths and certain tables blocked off and certain tables reserved. So we're starting to get a glimpse of what getting back into the world is going to look like. And I think it's going to be, I'm going to warn everybody, it's going to be a little creepy at first, because it does feel a little eerie being, sort of having all of these restrictions around you, but at least you're out. So I got to tell you, I felt really good about starting to see that come back, and we're starting to get a view of how we're starting to implement the easing of restrictions that they've already started in Europe, and doing so pretty prudently. So I'm pleased with what I'm seeing here.
Yeah. So agreed. I want to keep an eye on Hall County, Georgia in particular. The governor came out yesterday as he was down touring the healthcare system down in Albany, Georgia, which was one of the epicenters of COVID-19 here in Georgia and really in the Southeast for quite some time. They've been able to flatten that curve, while Hall County and the poultry capital of the world, as it's been touted forever, those workers are in close proximity, and there's been about 400 new infections in that center. So they're trying to get out ahead of it and not experience some of the same challenges they had in South Georgia. So we'll keep our finger on the pulse there. But Greg, I welcome your enthusiasm, and we're all chomping at the bit, I think, in our own different ways, of some semblance of normalcy, right? We all know it's going to be a new normal, but easing into that, even if it's a toe, at least speaking for myself, I'm looking forward to that. Real quick, Amanda, our CMO, is also monitoring and tuned in with us via LinkedIn Live in particular, although she's across several channels. Hello, Amanda. And Dusan, she waves at me from the studio here. Dusan, we didn't give you a quick specific shout out, but you joined us on a couple of different live streams here via Facebook. So welcome here today. I want to share some good news that Greg, I can't remember if we talked about this the other day or not, but this comes to us from Food Industry, foodnavigator-usa.com, a food industry news site. And this story is all about Kroger stepping in. We were talking earlier about how some organizations are very intentionally figuring out where they can help and moving their supply chain infrastructure or their resources or their people, you name it, to get into the fray. And, I'm real proud of what Kroger's done here, because there's been a big gap. In this case, they have purchased 200,000 gallons of milk that before the pandemic or in recent weeks was meant for food service and schools. And of course, when that demand went away and the orders went away, and there's no one at those sites, right, to even accept the orders, a lot of farmers have been stuck trying to find, okay, where can this go now? Well, Kroger stepped in here in recent weeks. This is dated May 1st, bought 200,000 gallons and is in the process of shipping that out to Feeding America's food banks, which is at least coast to coast. It may be North America, but it's at least coast to coast. And that makes me feel really good. Sarah, Greg, what's your take on that story?
That's amazing. I know that in BC and British Columbia here in Canada, they've also done the same thing with the farmers and the eggs. They're distributing the eggs to the food banks in Canada as well. And I think that it's, pretty much about time too, right? Yeah. Because we saw a lot in the last couple of weeks about waste in our food supply chains and things like that. And I think that it's great that companies like Kroger will step in and make sure that product is being distributed to those that need it.
Yeah, great point. Greg, want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, we've been having that discussion around our house of, the tomatoes didn't stop growing because people stopped eating at restaurants, right? And Publix, Kroger, and other companies have started to buy what would otherwise be surplus and go to waste and funnel it to needy organizations. So I think it's a great thing to see. I think one thing that's important to identify here is that 40% of the food produced goes to waste. And one of the things we need to figure out is how to make good use of that.
Yes, we do.
Because now all we're seeing, and this is a discussion I had with my daughters this weekend, all we're seeing now is we're seeing it go to waste because it's not in dumpsters out in the back of restaurants and grocery stores. Now it's being wasted in the fields.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that less food, maybe even more food is going to waste right now, but we certainly need, and I hope this raises an awareness of how much food does go to waste, and either how to rid ourselves of that waste by after the fact, or to temper production to be appropriate, right?
Yes. Even channeling it through to food banks, like we're kind of seeing right now. I mean, previously food banks have not been able to carry perishables, and maybe there's something in there, even for supply chain professionals, to pass on their knowledge to be able to help them figure that out and have that part of the food supply chain, move along the chain a little bit better than it has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point. All right, a lot of good stuff there. So we've got a string of folks we need to give a shout out to, especially on LinkedIn. And let's start with, let's see here. I need to eat more carrots. Speaking of food, my eyesight is failing me.
The two of us have glasses, and you're the only one that does not.
All right. So Susan Moody, hello, Susan. Hey, Tevin Taylor is with us, and Greg just popped off the live stream. I'm sure he'll be right back. Tevin, Sarah, you'll get a kick out of this. Tevin says, "Hey, somebody get Greg a Cowboys jersey. Can a Chiefs fan be credible?" Ouch, Tevin, bringing the heat. We've got Kirby Bishop. I really appreciate his comment there. I have been enjoying Supply Chain Now. Great insight and value. Appreciate that. And let's see here. Patrick Kelly, which Sarah, I bet you're aware of, our fellow podcaster, Patrick Kelly, who does a podcast on the food industry, I think the produce industry in particular. Greg, you missed Tevin's shot at you. He says you need to get a Cowboys jersey because he's not sure if Chiefs fans can be credible. Ouch. Greg, you want to respond?
No.
Hey, Hope. Hey, Hope. Thanks for joining us, Hope. Sorry, I just saw Hope on there.
54. 54 is all I got to say, Tevin.
Maybe I should have worn my Raptors jersey. I mean, I don't know.
World champs.
Yeah.
So Hope White is tuned in via Facebook. She says, hello, Sarah. And Fred Tolbert is tuned in once again. Looking forward to his commentary today. Memory says something. Pull this up real quick here. Memory shares. I'm not going to get to it. The comments are coming in quicker than my mouse finger moves. So it's amazing. Yeah, that's right. Memory says it's amazing the amount of waste being generated during this pandemic. That's a good point there. Great point there. Patrick talks about how many retailers are buying from farmers, and we need to help our community and the supply chain with storage and trucks to move this stuff with. Good point there. David Glover says, new viewer from southern Minnesota. Hey. Land of 10,000 lakes, but it's more than that, right? Sylvia.
Also the mouth of the Mississippi River.
That's right.
So the origin. I've been there.
Sylvia Judy is with us as she is making a batch of blueberry jam. So glad we are addressing the severe impact of food waste. Good point there.
Can you send some to Canada?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, maybe that is the solution, right? Maybe the solution is more jam. If it is, I'm all for that as a solution.
Amen. We've got Dylan and Abisham and plenty of others. So thanks for tuning in. We're going to keep moving here. Love the engagement, love the observations. But let's move along from good news to great series. So now that we've completed a 4-podcast series, 2 have been released, 2 are yet to be released on supply chain super trends.
Right.
We're going to dive into kind of highlights of the 2 that have been released and kind of a sneak peek of the 2 that are coming. So with all that said, Sarah, let's talk about the first episode, the Jumpstart episode. Give us a high-level overview of that.
Well, I think first I just want, hopefully everybody has tuned into, Super Trends number 1 and Super Trends number 2. Super Trends 1 can be found on Supply Chain Now, episode 307, and Super Trend number 2, episode 111 over on Let's Talk Supply Chain, either.com or wherever you subscribe to podcasts for both of those, actually. So Super Trend number 1, we talked about jump starting sustainability. Wow, that's a really, really big topic and kind of bleeds into number 2. But staying on topic, we talked about how it can sometimes be a little bit cringeworthy. Because people are just overusing the word, or they're using it for marketing purposes and not for the authentic part of supply chain the part of supply chain that it can play. So we talked a little bit about that. We gave a few really, really great examples. Over a month ago when we were able to be in person, I moderated a panel about sustainability, and I talk all about that because I had the head of carbon footprint for HP on that panel, and she gave us a lot of really, really great information on that. And then I think the last really important thing on my side to really note from that conversation was the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has come out with. And, just to take a look at it, and I think it's the agenda for 2030, but just to take a look at each one of those and start where you can influence on sustainability. I think we all get caught up in the really, really big picture and, get a little bit overwhelmed with what part we can play and what that means to maybe our supply chains or our business or us personally.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be about that. We just need to start where we can influence and then, building blocks from there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great. A lot of good stuff there. Greg, from that first episode, any initial thoughts or two or key takeaways?
Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway was, one, do something, right? Let's not talk about it. As Sarah said, and she came up with the cringeworthy term, as Sarah said, let's not make it a talking point. Let's make it an action point, right? As Scott loves to say, deeds, not words. And
thank you, John Phillips.
The other big thing to consider was we talked about taking your approach, because I believe, Sarah, there were 17 UN UN potential initiatives, and even that is a big number for starters. But start in concentric circles. So start with the thing most central to your control or most central to your impact, and work your way out, right? And as I vaguely recall either thinking or saying that, as my great uncle used to say, do something if you do it wrong. So, the key is action. That was the greatest takeaway for me, right? Not lip service, but real action.
Absolutely.
So speaking of that, Sylvia, who is the blueberry jam expert, talking about speaking of action, she's on her 3rd batch, and she's been distributing it in her neighborhood, mostly families and elderly residents.
Yes, go
change.
Sylvia.
So get this. She finishes her comment with change starts at home. So I love that, Sylvia.
Yeah.
Hello to Abanov from Germany. Great to have you here. We also have Bhavesh from India. Hello, Bhavesh from Mumbai. Great to have you here. And Memory, also our famous South Africa supply chain practitioner, also shares that a local retailer in Cape Town has stopped selling stationery and is encouraging locals to buy from an SME that operates next door to them. This is in order to ensure that the SME does not go out of business. How about that?
Amazing.
So, if you look for it, there is some uplifting stories, some good news stories in light of the challenging times that so many are having, both economically and health-wise, and let's face it, from just a mental anxiety standpoint, it's a challenging time for a lot of folks. Okay, I want to, if I can add to that first episode, a couple of cool things along the lines of, so Tim Debus, we talked about, who we sat down with a few months back. He's the president CEO of the Reusable Packaging Association. Packaging is a really hot topic has been for for several years now. There's so many cool things that are going on with especially reusable packaging, right?
Yeah.
I love, we talked in that episode about some of his thoughts on not just innovation, but also circularity and circularity thinking and how to bake that in more upstream rather than, now it's here. Well, what can we do with it? And then the other thing that we talked about in that first episode, Rubicon Global, which is a really neat, interesting company doing some good things in the sustainability space, I'll call it. It may not be 100% accurate, but we'll go with that. They had published that, if y'all remember that, I think top 50 list of small businesses in North America, or maybe in the States, that were really doing some actionable, taking real action to drive sustainability in their neck of the woods. And that's always, that goes back to the point that y'all both were making, deeds, not words. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
no doubt.
And since our conversation, I moderated a panel for the New York supply chain meetup about beauty supply chain. And there was a lot of really great conversation around packaging.
Yep.
Like you were talking about, and really that reusable mindset over the recycled mindset. Because like, I don't know about you, but I get packages all the time that are stuffed with all sorts of maybe recycled material. But then we hear about, the recycled depots not necessarily taking all the recyclable material or what's actually happening with it.
Right.
So it was more important to really look at the way that we can reuse the packaging rather than recycle.
Yeah.
Great point. Yeah. So many opportunities when it comes to packaging.
So much. Like, it's no wonder people are getting overwhelmed, but we really don't want people to be overwhelmed. Supply chains, businesses, professionals. We really just want to be able to change the mindset or be a little bit more intentional about what we're doing in each area of our businesses, our lives. And I think that's what these goals are. And like we said, just start where you can influence and then go from there.
Yep.
Outstanding. So, Greg, let's segue over to, hey, always moving forward, right? Really, we could dive into a single episode and do a 3-hour review. There's a ton of
3-hour review of a 40-minute episode.
Right. All right.
And then I will take the notes and I'll send you a picture of the piece of paper that I've written all the notes
My
on.
goodness, please transpose them. We
go.
We have seen your notes, your written notes. No one should, that is a point of productivity. No one should ever foist their handwritten notes on anyone else ever, because I wouldn't even send you all my notes.
And it's
I'm
all
not sure I can read them.
It's all recycled paper, okay?
I use a notepad, an electronic notepad. I'm so against paper.
Too, but pen and paper.
I know.
Pen and paper.
It's hard to break. It's hard to break.
All right, so let's move into episode number 2. So number 2, Greg, let's bring in you as quarterback, Greg White here. We talked about the death of end-to-end supply chain, the rumored death of end-to-end supply chain. Still a page from Mark Twain, and there's plenty of opinions on all sides. Greg, tell us what we talked about.
Well, the first thing we talked about is that there never really was an end-to-end supply chain, right? It's always, the supply chain hasn't changed. It's more of our recognition of it as, and the main point that we made, as circular. So you started to allude to that earlier, Scott. We delineated between circularity and sustainability in this episode. Sustainability being one of the efforts to to deal with goods after they're made, to make sure that packaging and whatnot is recycled or reused appropriately, but circularity being more about dealing with it on the front end and starting to build product so that it is recyclable or reusable or somehow more sustainable. So those were a couple of the components. And in addition to that, we did have a fairly lively discussion on whether there ever was an end-to-end supply chain. We talked about the possibility that the supply chain is really a supply network, which a lot of people would argue, because it's not just circular. There's a lot of crosses there. Maybe we should call it a supply chain tennis racket. No.
Everybody who doesn't know Greg, he is very into tennis.
He's the Atlanta City champion. He has to be, whether he likes or not. And he's got a rumored plate that circle around somewhere is turning into the fountain of youth, because I've still yet to see it.
Well, you know,
But
we thought we'd be back in the studio sooner,
true.
right?
A wall of awards.
But I think the important thing there, aside from thank you from the congratulations months later, is that we have to think about the end of a product's life cycle at the beginning. And that what that really means, and this is one of the things we talked about, is product design and merchandising really then have to become a conscious and as you said, Sarah, an intentional part of supply chain, so that we design the products, we begin with the end in mind.
So
now, according to Rob, we need to talk about the supply chain of a tennis racket. And actually, Rob, this is a really good point, because one of the biggest wastes in tennis are tennis balls.
I don't know. I think my dogs make pretty good use of them.
They're really, really bad. Really bad. The materials are bad.
Is that right?
You're using a new one all the time, and they don't get, as far as I know, they don't get recycled. I'm sure that there might be some companies out there. And if anybody knows about this, please let us know. But yeah, apparently the balls are really.
I can tell you they get used on the feet of my children's school chairs.
That they do, yes.
I've got some 12-year-old ones in my hopper in my garage for practicing. And lots of them get destroyed by mine and my children's dogs.
Well, perhaps they need their own live stream. We will tackle that next week, the live stream of the supply chain of tennis balls. But Bob Ahidi says, just to let you guys know, you make supply chain seem easy and smooth. And we all know here that it's anything but easy and smooth. Simply put, you guys are doing a great job. So Bob Ahidi, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Jeffrey Miller says, I'm seeing sustainability goals being prioritized as supply chain resiliency is being re-examined. Closed loop supply chains designed for reusability. Excellent stuff there. And then one final note here, Jay Fortenberry says the old way we used to say that was designed for Six Sigma. Interesting.
He is actually, Jay Fortenberry is going to be live on the Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn page with me next Tuesday at 4 p.m. And we're going to be talking about the new supply chain paradigm.
All right. Love that, Jay. I love all the comments. There's so much, sustainability, the greater picture, the circular economy. We talked about coming in, how some organizations, depending on who you talk to just get through the current environment. Some of those projects have been shelved, let's face it. And in other cases, as is evident with the comments from our listeners here today, some companies are doubling down, and now's the time, right? It'll be really interesting in the months ahead, especially as we see any potential shifts, in global supply chains. We get into the aftermath, all the information gets on the table, and decisions are made, and root cause analysis is applied to some of the gaps and opportunities and challenges we've seen play out in recent months. All right, so let's keep driving here.
Well, let me shout out to Rob Dillon real quick.
Yeah.
So Rob knows a lot about the origination and the end of product. Rob works for a company called Flourish Software, which is a seed to sale tracking solution in the cannabis industry. There are some folks in your neck of the woods, Sarah, who use this technology. And interestingly, in the cannabis industry, they track every element of the product. They literally know, because of legal reasons, but not necessarily supply chain reasons, but it accrues to the same benefit. They know which leaf, which plant came from, how it was fertilized, what kind of fertilizer, what kind of light it received, all of those sorts of things, all the way from the seed or the clone of the product, all the way through to its sale to the end user. So there are some some opportunities to learn from that industry, a very, very highly regulated industry.
Awesome. And just one last point on death to end versus circular. One of the points that we talked about on the episode was whether companies can afford to do it because they've put so much investment into end to end. And then the quote that really stuck with me from that episode was circular changes waste into opportunity. So according to an article by Sorasis and Michael Hoban, our planet's resources are finite. So many companies must look at becoming circular to grow and create a sustainable company independent of declining resources. So something, sorry, Scott, I know you want to move on, but
no.
Throw that in.
No, that's good.
Yeah, no, that's good.
It's tough to bake these things down into perfectly snackable 7 and 8 minute highlight clips, right?
Especially when we all get together. I mean, I'm telling you,
yes.
episode number 4, Super Trend number 4 is like an hour. And not because I spoke a lot. I'm just saying.
Yeah, Greg, I'll tell you what. No, I'm kidding. All right, so Claudia Freed, who's back with us, big friend of the show, she likes how we talk about now is the time. So, Claudia, great to have you here and looking forward to having you on a live stream in a week or two. All right, one last thing that we haven't, maybe we've touched on a little bit when it comes to sustainability and circularity and how we can bake that in. You know, it's not going to be sustainable, no pun intended, unless it impacts the bottom line, or at least it'll be a lot more sustainable if you get everyone rallied around all the different ways they can benefit. And you know, one of the things we talked about in the second episode is the changing consumer sentiments, right? Yeah. More and more consumers, especially as you see generational transfer take place and where the bulk of the plurality said that 3 times falls to from a generational standpoint and what they care about. So, you know, for companies that don't get it right, they're going to continue to see more and more risk when it comes to revenue and that bottom line. So,
and it maybe even top line.
That's right. Good point.
Yeah, but it also depends on what they're going to pay for.
Right.
There's a really fine balance of what that's going to look like. People may want it to be sustainable, but they may not want to pay for it.
Yeah. All right. So on this, you know, let's go off topic for a second here.
Okay.
We're about halfway through.
We're not off topic yet. Okay, good.
No, where are we going now? Ooh. I'm scared.
I should have brought 3 more nets for this one, but no. Chasing butterflies. No, let's talk about consumer sentiments, because, you know, one of the things that we talked about yesterday, Greg, was the medical supply chain here in the States and what the Trump administration is looking at doing. You know, we're not, I think a lot of companies internationally will be looking, we're hearing already, they're vetting and revetting their current supply chain, and as all the facts get on the table, you know, certain decisions will be made in the months ahead. And we talked yesterday, and Sarah, to bring you in the conversation, we talked yesterday about some of the, you know, the national security related supply chains, pharmaceutical, you know, those that have more, they carry more weight, right? Based on where they originate or based on where the biggest footprint is. If I can talk out of both sides of my mouth for a second, Greg, because I've really been thinking about this since yesterday, is at the same time, what do y'all take here? So as I believe, at least, and get y'all's take, that consumer sentiment was a big part of that will still be price, you know, in the months and years ahead, you know, and one of my thoughts is that will, you know, while some folks are projecting massive shifts and reshoring and some other major trends, I'm not sure how that will take place if consumer sentiment, you know, remains centered in you know, top 3 priority form on price. So who wants to weigh in first and give us your take? Because it's a tough, my crystal ball isn't necessarily working at full speed here.
Yeah, I don't think there's a way to accurately predict it, but fortunately we're sort of in a Sports Center format here. So like the people who said Patrick Mahomes would be a bust in the NFL, right. We won't be held accountable if we're wrong down the road. No, I'd prefer to be right. But look, I think one of the things we've got to think about is there are a lot of options to reshoring. It will undoubtedly happen in some measure. Some people, and I'd love to credit this to the right person. I think I know who it is, but I don't want to credit it to the wrong person in case I'm not remembering it right. They called it a China Plus process, wherein China remains the primary resource, but they have 1 or 2 active backups. And frankly, regardless of where you source your goods, you should always be doing that.
Yeah, China plus one or plus two, we've heard a lot about.
Especially with the potential for supply chain disruption. And the other is reshoring. I mean, one of the others is reshoring and automation. And particularly as regards, this is what is so, I'm going to say interesting, but I think everyone who's out there can see by the look on my face, I don't mean interesting. We used to produce our own pharmaceuticals right here in the United States, in Puerto Rico. And we had a program that made it beneficial to the pharma companies to produce the goods in the States, and they did. And it was a great benefit to one of our main protectorates, right? Essentially the 51st state of the US is Puerto Rico. So we used to have the ability to do that. And I know we can have the ability to do that again. It's going to take some change in regulation and probably some corporate assistance or whatever.
Yeah.
But in any case, the benefit to the states and to the economy for the production is much, much greater than the cost.
So real quick there, and Sarah, I want to get you way in. Rare earth mineral mining used to be very prevalent here in the States as well. However, at a great environmental cost, from what I understand. When I was starting to dive into that more in recent months,
true.
Folks weighed in and said that's why it's not here anymore, because of the regulation. And you know, there's good and bad in all this. None of these decisions, as we all know, are black and white and binary. But Sarah, weigh in on what, you know, especially I love that you can bring your Canadian perspective to play here, because, you know, it needs to be, supply chains are global, and they will remain global. And, you know, sometimes here in the States, we focus too much on this market here, but weigh in, tell us what you believe is most important.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. I had a presentation on a board meeting a few weeks ago from an economist, and who we're going to have actually coming up at our supply chain conference, talking about how globalization is not going anywhere. I think that diversification of suppliers is something that companies are going to take a look at. I think that there are a number of different places, depending on your product, of where you can go for manufacturing outside of China, but I don't think that it's going to happen overnight. So in the live that I'm doing with Jay and Jono next Tuesday, we're going to talk about Vietnam, because Jay Fortenberry—
Can you copy and paste these long comments? I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm making a quick production side note. Keep going.
Jay Fortenberry is very much involved with Vietnam and the upskilling of workers, and we're going to be talking all about that next week. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of different options. There's a lot of different things that we need to think about. You know, the French president was talking about nearshoring PPE products, potentially prescription antibiotics, different things like that. So different countries are looking at this differently. I think there's going to be certain products that I think are going to be brought back in-house. I also think that it's also going to be consumer driven. So you've got, you know, a lot of warehouses, capital intensive warehouses, carrying finished product inventory. It's a lot of money sitting on the shelves. Excellent. And so, you know, just in time, we've noticed through COVID is not necessarily working as effectively as we would like it. Some people are talking about just in case inventory, but then you've also got to think about customization from a consumer standpoint. And the customization, you know, 3D printers can play a role in that. And so you might have warehouses going from finished product to raw material. And so there's a lot to think about, and companies have a lot of choice, and it really just depends on strategy. It depends on product, of which one is really going to fit in the best.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Sorry. So no.
I think those are all really good points.
Absolutely. So this is what I'm distracted with. As both of you were weighing in, we were getting extended opinions and comments from our audience, especially on LinkedIn. And rather than read them off audibly, our team, Amanda and Clay, are going to be posting them so where I can share them visually, because I want to go through these. Because both of you really shared some really valuable insights there. So let's start with, if y'all can see this, Jeffrey on LinkedIn. Circular, closed-end supply chains don't have to be zero-sum, win or lose. The best ones define economic incentives for each stakeholder, recycling, stable supply, so on and so forth. Good stuff there, Jeffrey. And Claudia agrees with that. And This is from Jonathan, our dear friend JT, Jonathan Townsley. That's right. He says you got to look for the best value rather than the lowest cost. Sometimes that best value can be here in the U.S., but only the buyer can really know the answer to that question. That is really important, and that comes from a global procurement executive that gets it. So
that applies to consumers as well. I mean,
that is a huge important point, and that's bringing procurement and supply chain together in collaboration. We're going to be talking about that at the conference because it's super, super, super important.
Yep. And we're going to try to, we got about 4 or 5 more comments here, but we're going to keep driving. We're going to have to come back to them.
All right.
Amanda and Clay, if you are going to keep loading those, I think that helps out tremendously because Sarah and Greg can actually see the comments, especially some of the longer ones, and it helps the conversation.
That way I don't have to ask you to repeat it twice like I usually do.
Well, I can barely speak English too. So,
it's not you. It's me.
And you can't see. You just made a comment about carrots. I mean, we're having a great time, guys.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So, So let's keep driving because those two
huge topics. I mean, this is why we called the series Super Trends.
Well,
that's right.
Okay, so as long as we're swirling here, let's go back to Jonathan's comment, and that is only the buyer can determine, right? We keep imploring the consumers to change their behavior, but in truth, the consumer's desire is dependent on their balance of value for price. And we can't change that for every single human being on the planet. I mean, you can see the diverse opinions and thoughts and lifestyles and life situations that people have. You just can't expect consumers, like they're a big group of common personalities, to change things. So in the end, we do have to think about potentially and you gave a great example, Sarah, this desire for customization. That is a great vehicle for 3D printing or whatever other kinds of vehicles might be available closer to the last mile kind of construction type products, right?
Yep.
Well, and think of the reduction in carbon footprint. Think about the sustainability option just from housing raw material versus finished product. I mean, you've just unpacked a whole other conversation that we could probably take another couple of hours to talk about, because even from a procurement perspective, COVID has really shone a light on being able to empower your employees to make the decisions that they need to. And that's both in procurement and supply chain. So lots really to unpack there, but I don't know if we have the time.
We don't. But it's not take away from the conversation, but I want to get through some of these other comments here. Fred Tolbert, people won't manufacture move back to the U.S. Reshoring is a challenge due to labor shortage in the U.S. That's a good point there. Robotics and automation is going to be a big part there. Jeffrey on LinkedIn, the pandemic has shown us get more lean on inventory, as Sarah was talking about earlier, than our resiliency is able to support. That is an interesting comment because, if we've heard one term get coined in the last 8 months or 12 months, whatever it is, it's that R word, it's that resiliency, right?
Mm-hmm. We have to be very careful not to respond too dramatically to what is likely a once in a lifetime event. However, because it's not the pandemic that has shut down the economy, it's our response to it, this seismic societal disruption, where we've decided to shut down the economy universally across the nation. I can't see that happening again. It could. Something else of that measure, well, not of that measure, but of a spike type measure could happen.
Yeah.
But all right.
We want to be careful there.
That's right.
In any case.
So Clay Luton, my brother of all folks, weighs in here. Great to have him on LinkedIn Live with us. Quote, I can see the administration continuing to put their thumb on the scale to change the calculus for moving operations out of China to level the consumer cost playing field. That's a good comment. Smart. We'll see what happens there.
We'll see.
Yeah, we will see. Sarah, that's been my favorite phrase here in recent months because, again, my crystal ball, these are unique times. Unforeseen times. There's not really a whole bunch that are super relevant from a modern history standpoint arguably, that you can point to, that has all the dynamics that this has. So we'll see. And of course, supply chain and healthcare and a few other particular sectors of the workforce are left holding the bag. The ones that have to be in the moment, making these tough decisions to keep things moving before we get all the facts on the table. So,
but we are the right people, because supply chainers are problem solvers. They are the ones that look for the solution. So,
yep.
I mean, I just
and deal with disruptions in some measure all the time, right?
Yep. All right, one last comment, and then we've got to move on to the last 2 episodes that will be published here real soon. I love these comments, folks, from all the listeners. So Jeffrey, again, weighs in. Sarah makes a great point on just in time versus what?
Just in case.
Just in case. Thank you very much. The pandemic has shown us that we've become too lean on inventories across many product supply chains that our resiliency continuity plans can handle. Now, to our folks that are in the live stream watching that now, I hate to be redundant, but for folks that will listen to this episode later, we want to make sure they can hear these comments as they're posted on the live stream. All right, so I'm not sure where the score is, but Sarah, by my track, I've got you at 17.5 points. I got Greg at 16.5 points, and I've got 1.5. So we're going to keep driving. All right, so we're going to talk about the 2 episodes that we're going to be publishing really soon.
Yes.
Episode the
355.
Yeah. So Sarah, let me just toss it over to you. Talk about these final 2 episodes, and then we'll talk about some key takeaways.
Sure. Yeah. So Super Trend number 3 is episode 355 on supply chain now. That's coming up this Monday. So stay tuned for that one. But we're talking about the holistic approach to talent. And I'm going to give away a little secret. I might challenge the HR community a little bit. Just a little bit.
Good. That's good.
Yeah, and we talk about the hiring process. We talk about the gaps. We talk about storytelling to attract talent. I mean, this one topic is huge. There's a lot to unpack. We do unpack a lot of it. It's a really good in-depth discussion on that. But a couple of things that I want to throw in on conversations that I've had since we've recorded that conversation, and something that I'll leave you with on this episode. I had a conversation with a recruiter this morning, and he was basically saying that the person that is vetting the talent sometimes doesn't understand the language of the position that you're trying to fill. So if you've got on your resume or on LinkedIn or anything, like let's for example, throw that out there, CPO, which means procurement officer. If that person doesn't know what CPO means and they are trying to find talent for that type of position, there was an example used that person was actually cast aside because they didn't know what CPO meant.
That seems pretty short-sighted to me. But going back, I think
these are the gaps, right? These are
it's a substantial miscommunication.
Yeah. Sorry, it's just an example of some of the things that we're talking about in this episode that are super critical to how we need to look at talent management moving forward.
Yeah.
That gap that we spent a lot of the episode talking about, that is very real between the folks that talent will be reporting to, that are leading supply chains and leading initiatives to, and this isn't taken away from anyone, right? I've rubbed elbows. We all probably have with the savviest of HR leaders, right? And they've got a very tough job because they kind of have to be the master of all industries. So it's less about those functional leaders and more about just the gap that is important for everyone to understand. It's not taking anything away from anyone's functional area or title, what have you, but that communication gap and that lack of understanding gap can be very challenging for a lot of organizations. And we dive into that in that 3rd episode. Yeah. All right. So Sarah, tee it up for the 4th episode that we'll be releasing.
Yeah. So Super Trends number 4 is episode 119, and you're going to be able to find that on the Let's Talk Supply Chain podcast in about 4 weeks as of Monday. So we've spaced these out, and we've got a wrap-up party actually happening June 11th at 2 p.m. on Twitter. Plus, I think we might be working on live streaming that too. So you're definitely gonna want to mark that one in your calendars. But Super Trends number 4 is about the startup mentality. And so we talk about a lot of different things, enterprise companies versus innovation. What does that look like? How do they take on a startup mentality? How is, startup really bringing innovation to supply chain, and the reemergence of ancient technology? I mean, there's a lot more to it, guys. We talk for a good hour on this topic, and there are some really good nuggets from both Scott and Greg, and it's just a great conversation. What did you guys think?
Greg, you go first.
Yeah,
and I'll weigh in tomorrow.
Yeah, I think on the HR one, the gap is largely the responsibility of the hiring department, not the HR person. If the HR person doesn't know what CPO means, or they don't know what procurement means, then that's a gap that the hiring department leader has to close. I think the other thing that we talked about is, and this is really important, there are a couple things that stood out, but one is hiring is the most important thing you do.
Absolutely. And I think all three of us are tired of hearing that there's not enough talent. I mean, there could be on the tech side for the really technical roles, but in general, in supply chain, I mean, that's one thing that we talk about too.
Well, we're seeing more interest. If you look at the over to 500 programs, at least in the States, ranging from 4-year degree to 2-year degree to tech schools, we're seeing more interest from a couple different studies coming into the space. That's really encouraging. I want to say Malcolm also shot me a quick note talking about hiring and supply chain, how we've all seen more specialists be hired and more talent acquisition resources and teams be stood up that can be trained and aimed and informed and learned up on specific needs. That's been a great thing that has been taking place for years now.
Just so everybody knows, Malcolm is the little guy that sits on Scott's shoulder, and whenever he needs some information, he just whispers in his ear.
Almost, but we'll work with that with a working definition.
I like that. That's a really good visual.
Oh, Malcolm. Malcolm wants to talk with you after the episode, so I'll let y'all two duke that out.
Now you're in trouble.
All right. So, hey, one other thing. Speaking of that last episode, one of the aspects that I enjoyed was how the real practical examples of innovation. Who would have thunk that Domino's Pizza would be looked at as a leading innovator, whether you like their pizza or not, like their food or not. We all have different opinions. They're doing some really cool things, and you'll have to tune into that episode to find out more, right?
Exactly. And Greg, what did you think of that episode? Because we totally cut you off earlier.
Well, I think that Domino's was a great example of a startup mentality, right? I mean, they remarketed themselves, and that went to the question, Sarah, that you asked during that episode of, can you brand yourself into a startup mentality or into a new identity? And the truth is, you have to change. We talked about you have to change your culture to be able to do that. So you can dig a little bit deeper into that there. And the other thing was, and I think this is important for companies to recognize, you are either the disruptor or the disrupted. If you are a major brand, you cannot disrupt an industry. I will argue that till day's end, by the way, regardless of who you are.
So everybody contact him, DM him.
And they will, and they have, by the way. And I've gotten some really interesting comments on that front. It's very difficult for a big organization to understand, with the blessing of naivete, how things could be done in their industry. And I'll leave it at that. And you can talk about that or review that in the episode.
Yep. Good point. All right. So speaking of talent, who would have thought that talent was so dominant of a subject as it is in this review episode? Sylvia says, hey, most HR hiring managers are sadly unfamiliar with their company's needs for function-specific jobs. I'm constantly amazed by that fact. And again, isn't picking on anyone. We all have our gaps, and we all have talked about and spoken to the gap that can exist between the HR and the talent acquisition and the hiring folks and the practitioners and other functions. So it's something we're going to have to overcome to get better and better at the essential task that is hiring and onboarding.
Well, and I think if you're aware of the problem, help solve it. That would be my discussion, right?
Yeah,
I mean, because people in functional jobs are sadly unaware of the HR function, to be clear. Yeah. So we can't expect a different standard from them than we have of ourselves. And I think it's our job as functional leaders to educate the HR department on what they need to know to be able to help us make good decisions.
Yeah, good point. Sarah, you going to weigh in?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, there's gaps all over the place, and it's not just in the hiring aspect. It's just that for that super trend, we decided to talk about talent and taking a look at it from a holistic perspective. But listen, there's gaps in between supply chain and marketing, supply chain and customer experience, supply chain and customer service. So, there's a lot of things we need to work on in all aspects.
This week alone. Yes. We solve it all. We need to solve it all by Friday at 5 p.m.
Hey, we're getting there on TP, by the way. So,
good. Hey, Jeffrey Miller agrees with Fred and Greg, with everybody. I think Freddie made the point, and Greg made the point. Factories and labor are needed if we're going to reshore in a serious manner. Good stuff there. All right, so let's, we're at the 55-minute mark. So Sarah, hey, welcome to the golden hour, a new standard maybe. But we want to wrap up with some upcoming events and resources, as well as where you got to get your news. What do you have to check on every morning from a website standpoint to get critical news analysis? Share with our audience what helps y'all stay informed. So, Sarah.
Yeah. So LinkedIn is huge for me. I mean, I don't start the day without checking LinkedIn. It means that I can check in with the community. It means that I can check in on the news and what people are talking about, what they're posting about. And so I would say LinkedIn. I mean, I think I spend half my life on LinkedIn. I know you guys are very active on Twitter. I don't spend as much time on Twitter, but LinkedIn is definitely my go-to. As far as upcoming events, I mean, I know just as well as you guys do that the calendar is, ever expanding on a day-to-day basis. So I've got a LinkedIn Live on the Let's Talk Supply Chain page next week at 4 p.m. with Jay Fortenberry and Jono. Jono is out of Australia with a startup called Verify, and we're going to be talking about the new paradigm of supply chain. I've got a couple of more virtual panel discussions that are coming up peppered. I've got one May 28th talking about supply chain risks with Supply Chain Canada and FIT, the Forum for International Trade Training. And then a couple more panel discussions with in June 9th, June 11th, and those are all going to be live streamed as well. So stay tuned for that. And then the biggest one is June 25th. It's our one-day virtual supply chain conference. On the stage are going to be all practitioners. And Greg White, he is going to be moderating one of those panels. And we're going to have a startup showcase in the afternoon. Irene Roska is going to be there, Eric Johnson, Audrey Ross, and we've got some big names coming up. We're just finalizing the agenda, and we'll have that out next week. But we're going to start the day off with an economist. They are going to give us the viewpoint of what the economy looks like now, what can we expect for the rest of the year and into 2021. So, and you can find all of the events. We do a Sunday session post Sunday night on Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn, or I have them on the homepage at letstalksupplychain.com. Sorry, that was so long.
That's good. A lot of good stuff for folks.
Yeah, that is good.
All right. So Greg, I'll tee up the events, but in particular, Greg, you've got a plethora of golden news and nuggets sites. Yeah. What's your go-tos? I mean, what would you recommend to folks?
I've gone back to the sources. If I want data on healthcare matters, particularly COVID, I go to to the CDC here in the States. If I want news, I go to Reuters because that's where most people get their, most publications get their stories from Reuters. They don't, don't write so many of them themselves. And on supply chain, I use Supply Chain Dive. I think they do a great job of reporting the stories. They have a couple of really exceptional writers who must have been practitioners. I don't know them, but their knowledge of the industry is outstanding. And the articles aren't advertorials as they can be in so many other publications. So
good one.
Outstanding. All right. So wrap it up with a couple other events. I want to share the Resilience 360, which Todd Craig weighed in on the LinkedIn earlier when we talked about how resilience is got some new cachet, right? It's on the tip of everyone's tongue. Well, good kudos to Resilience 360 for wearing that. And I tell you, I know how busy they've been. They've got an upcoming webinar on May 14th. Unfortunately, we're all, as we're still fighting through the pandemic environment, hurricane season's around the corner, and that always means big things for global supply chains. So check that out. I think we've got that in the show notes of the episode. And then, Greg, we've got Mike Griswold with Gartner joining us again on May 27th. There we'll be publishing the Gartner Top 25 Supply Chain list, which is always chock full of insights and observations. And Mike will be sharing some key takeaways with us on the 27th, right?
Save yourself $140,000 in Gartner subscription and learn about the top 25 on supply chain now. No kidding.
No, that's a good point. I mean,
these are the top supply chains in the world, not just the States. Gartner is the premier analyst group in the world, all things technology and supply chain. And Mike Griswold is a practitioner first before an analyst. And it's a great opportunity to learn what these companies are doing, and particularly exciting to Scott and I. Gartner has added a corporate responsibility metric to their measurement in the top 25. So you can expect some shifting around in the top 25, and know that these are supply chains that are putting out the effort and also getting the results in terms of corporate responsibility in addition to efficiency and effectiveness.
Awesome.
Great. Well said. You can, and of course, Supply Chain Trivia Night coming up May 13th, right before that webinar. And you can go to supplychainradio.com to sign up for that. Looks like Mr. Inventory is signed up to defend his title. We'll see how that plays out next week.
It. Yeah.
I'm this close to Angie.
Sarah was flying high and she had technical difficulties.
Yeah, my internet kaput. And then I was out.
We've experienced that. All right, so Sarah, let's make sure folks know how to get in touch with you. So tell us how can we find you?
Let's talk supplychain.com or Sarah Barnes-Humphrey on LinkedIn. Let's Talk Supply Chain on LinkedIn. So make sure to come and check us out. Plus, remember our wrap-up party on Twitter, June 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern. This is going to be a fun party. So come in.
Is it going to actually be a party? I mean, Scott, is it okay if I bring a beverage?
Yeah.
Sure. I won't write your name on the board, I promise.
2 p.m. Eastern time, correct?
Yeah.
Mine
so
looks
5
like
o'clock
water.
somewhere.
All right. Mohib is with us, professor from Wichita. He enjoyed the show. Thanks for the insights. Really appreciate that. And, real quick, in true fashion of a live stream, that we got 2 comments from folks I want to share as we wrap up. One's from Fred Tolbert, who says, hey, would love to see increased use of robotics. Data he sees is that Korea has 3 times the number of robots per 10,000 manufacturing workers than the U.S. U.S. is number 7 on that list, just ahead of Italy. Big opportunity for progressive USA companies. Well said, Fred. That almost rhymes. And then we've got from David Glover. I'm a year out of college with a business degree and a supply chain analyst for an industrial construction supply company. So coming from a person who is not an executive, he's trying to learn more about supply chain and how he can use his position to improve the companies.
Good job, David.
You guys help with that, so thank you.
Great initiative, David.
Yeah, great point.
Well done.
All right. Well, Great show. Sarah and Greg really have enjoyed the series, enjoyed this episode here as we walk through the 4 episodes and a lot more. It's tough to get that done in an hour and 3 minutes, but looking forward to the Twitter chat, Sarah.
Yes, it's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you guys for having me on. Thanks for doing the series with me, and we'll see everybody on our shows.
Yeah,
that's right. So
Monday we release the next one, right?
That's right.
So be on the lookout for that wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome.
Wherever you get your podcast from. So on behalf of Sarah Barnes-Humphrey and Greg White, this is Scott Luton wishing you all the best from Team Supply Chain Now. And let's talk supply chain. And we'll see you next time, wherever you get your podcast from. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks for joining. See you later.